The Belgian Malinois should have attacked her. For 3 hours, no doctor, nurse, or FBI agent had been able to get close to the unconscious former Special Operations soldier lying in the hospital bed. The military canine guarded him with deadly determination, refusing to trust anyone. Then trauma nurse Emma Brooks walked into the room. She ignored the dog and focused only on saving the patient. To everyone's shock, the canine quietly stepped aside. No command, no struggle, no explanation. Before dawn, that single moment of trust would expose a traitor hiding inside the hospital, stop another assassination attempt, and change the lives of Emma, the wounded soldier, and the loyal dog forever. But one question remained. How did Ranger know she was the only person he could trust? Rain hammered against the wide glass entrance of Cedar Ridge Regional Hospital with enough force to blur the parking lot into a sea of silver. Thunder rolled across the Colorado mountains, rattling the windows of the trauma wing as ambulances came and went beneath flashing emergency lights. Nights like this usually meant car crashes, hypothermia, or hikers caught in flash floods. Tonight would be different. Emma Brooks adjusted the stethoscope around her neck as she stepped through the employee entrance at exactly 10:55 p.m. At 33 years old, Emma carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent over a decade making life-and-death decisions. She stood about 5'8", with an athletic build shaped by long shifts rather than gym memberships. Her chestnut brown hair was tied into a practical ponytail, a few loose strands already escaping from the damp night air. Sharp green eyes rarely missed details, while the faint freckles across her cheeks softened an otherwise serious face. Patients often remembered her calm voice more than her appearance. Doctors respected her because she never panicked. Families trusted her because she never made promises she couldn't keep. That composure had been forged years earlier. At 26, Emma had lost her fiancé, firefighter Jason Miller, during a warehouse collapse. Since then, she had quietly buried herself in trauma medicine, convincing herself that saving strangers was easier than risking her own heart again. Now another decision weighed heavily on her. Inside her locker sat an unsigned resignation letter. By next month, she planned to leave Cedar Ridge forever and accept a position at a larger trauma center in Seattle. Better salary, better opportunities, fewer memories, or so she kept telling herself. Still carrying that letter around? Emma turned to see Sarah Mitchell leaning against the nurse's station with 2 paper cups of coffee. Sarah, 29, was shorter than Emma, with curly blonde hair tucked beneath a blue surgical cap and warm hazel eyes that always seemed to smile before she did. She possessed an infectious optimism that somehow survived endless overnight shifts. While Emma approached every problem analytically, Sarah believed nearly every difficult situation could be solved by patience, kindness, and one more conversation. She handed Emma a coffee. "You know," Sarah said, "most people who actually want to quit don't keep thinking about it for 3 weeks." Emma smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm just organized." Sarah laughed. "No, you're scared." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Scared of what?" "That leaving won't fix what you're trying to run from." Emma looked down at the resignation envelope sticking halfway out of her backpack. The silence answered for her. Before Sarah could continue, every phone at the nurse's station chimed simultaneously. Trauma alert. Helicopter ETA 4 minutes. The relaxed atmosphere disappeared instantly. Doctors hurried toward Trauma Bay 4. Respiratory therapists prepared ventilators. Security officers moved to clear the hallway. Emma scanned the preliminary report. Male, mid-30s, multiple gunshot wounds, severe blood loss, classified federal transport. No name, no identifying information, no next of kin. Only one instruction appeared in bold letters. Do not separate patient from canine. Emma frowned. That's unusual. Before anyone could speculate further, the distant thumping of helicopter blades echoed above the hospital roof. Minutes later, the emergency doors burst open. Rain and cold wind swept into the trauma corridor as paramedics rushed a stretcher inside. The patient barely moved beneath soaked thermal blankets. His face was bruised, his left shoulder heavily bandaged, and dried blood stained the collar of a torn tactical shirt. Even unconscious, he looked physically imposing. The man appeared around 36 years old, standing well over 6 feet when upright, with broad shoulders built through years of military service. Short, dark brown hair framed a weathered face marked by a thin scar running along his jawline. His strong features suggested discipline more than aggression, while even in unconsciousness there remained a strange alertness, as though every instinct refused to surrender completely. His admission bracelet read only, "Nathan Cross." Then everyone noticed the dog. The Belgian Malinois walked beside the stretcher without a leash. Around 75 pounds of lean muscle moved with silent precision. His sable coat was soaked from the storm, dark ears standing perfectly upright despite exhaustion. A faded military working dog harness remained strapped across his chest, scratched from years of deployment. One amber eye caught the fluorescent lights, while a small scar above his right shoulder hinted at battles no ordinary pet would ever experience. His name tag simply read, Ranger. The hallway became strangely quiet. No barking, no growling, only watchful silence. As the stretcher rolled into Bay 4, Ranger positioned himself between the medical staff and Nathan. His body lowered slightly, every muscle tightened. One emergency physician, Dr. Kevin Harper, stepped forward. Harper was 45, tall and slightly overweight with years of emergency medicine behind him. Brilliant in crisis but impatient by nature, he disliked anything that interrupted routine. "We don't have time for this," Harper muttered. He reached toward Nathan's IV line. Ranger exploded. The growl echoed through the trauma bay like distant thunder. His teeth flashed inches from Harper's hand. The physician stumbled backward so quickly he nearly collided with a supply cart. Nobody spoke. Even security froze. One federal agent standing near the doorway sighed quietly. "Doctor," he said, "I wouldn't try that again." The man stepped into the light. He introduced himself with calm authority. "Special Agent Mason Reed, FBI." Mason Reed appeared to be in his early 40s, clean-shaven with close-cropped black hair and piercing blue eyes that rarely revealed emotion. Tall and broad-shouldered beneath a dark raincoat, he carried himself with the discipline of someone who had spent years in federal tactical operations. "The dog has refused every medical provider since extraction," Reed explained. "We've sedated the patient twice. The dog still won't let anyone touch him." Another doctor whispered, "So what are we supposed to do?" Nobody answered. Emma quietly removed her gloves. She studied Ranger. The dog wasn't wild. He wasn't frightened. He was evaluating. His eyes never left the hands of every person who entered the room. Not their faces, their hands. Emma took one slow step forward. Sarah grabbed her wrist. "Emma!" She shook her head gently. "It's okay." Instead of looking directly at Ranger, Emma looked past him toward Nathan. Her voice remained soft. "You've done your job." The Malinois didn't move. "You got him here alive." One ear twitched. Emma stopped walking, leaving several feet between them. She didn't challenge him. She didn't offer food. She didn't attempt to touch him. She simply waited. For nearly 10 long seconds, nothing happened except the rain striking the hospital windows. Then Ranger blinked. His rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. Another second passed. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the Belgian Malinois stepped sideways. Just enough to clear a path to Nathan's bedside. Every person in the trauma bay stared in stunned silence. Dr. Harper whispered, "I don't believe that." Special Agent Reed didn't either. Neither did Sarah, but none of them moved. Only Emma walked forward. She knelt beside Nathan, checked his pulse, examined the bleeding beneath the temporary bandages, and immediately began issuing calm, precise instructions to the room. Ranger lay down beside the bed. For the first time since arriving, he stopped watching everyone else and started watching Emma. The silence inside Trauma Bay 4 lasted only a few seconds before Emma Brooks's voice brought everyone back to work. I need 2 units of O-negative, a portable ultrasound, and someone to notify the operating room that we may need emergency thoracic surgery. The room immediately came alive again. Nurses rushed towards supply cabinets while respiratory therapists adjusted oxygen flow. Yet despite the sudden movement, no one crossed the invisible boundary Ranger had established. The Belgian Malinois remained lying beside Nathan Cross's bed, his amber eyes following every pair of hands except Emma's. It was as if, in the dog's mind, only one person in the room had earned permission to touch his handler. Emma carefully cut away the remaining blood-soaked fabric from Nathan's tactical shirt. Multiple stitched wounds covered his chest and shoulder, but one injury immediately caught her attention. A fresh bullet wound beneath his right collarbone had continued bleeding far longer than expected. Whoever had treated him before arrival had managed to keep him alive, but only barely. She replaced the temporary dressing with practiced precision, her movements calm despite the growing number of federal agents gathering outside the room. Nathan remained unconscious, though his heartbeat had become more stable. Up close, Emma noticed details she had missed before. His hands were covered in old scars, thin white lines across his knuckles and palms that spoke of years spent climbing, fighting, and surviving in places most people would never see. A faded wedding band mark circled his left ring finger, though no ring remained. She wondered who had once stood beside him, but quickly pushed the thought aside. Questions could wait. Keeping him alive could not. Outside the trauma bay, Special Agent Mason Reed spoke quietly into an encrypted radio before turning toward the hospital's administrative staff. His expression had grown even more serious. "Lock down the entire trauma corridor," he ordered. "No unauthorized personnel, no visitors. Every entry point gets an agent." Nobody argued. Reed had the kind of authority that came not from raising his voice but from speaking as though every second mattered. Hospital Administrator Linda Foster hurried toward him. Linda was a woman in her late 50s, with neatly styled silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Years of managing medical crises had made her composed under pressure, but tonight, even she struggled to hide her concern. "Agent Reed," she said quietly, "this is still a public hospital. We can't simply close an entire wing without explaining something to our staff." "You don't need to explain everything," Reed answered evenly. "You only need to explain enough to keep people alive." Linda studied his face for a long moment before giving a slow nod. "I'll cooperate." Within 15 minutes, security doors electronically locked. Elevators serving the trauma floor required staff identification. Uniformed officers appeared at every intersection. Nurses whispered among themselves, trying to understand why a single patient required more protection than a visiting governor. Emma finally stepped outside Bay 4 to update Nathan's chart. Reed was waiting. "How is he?" "Still critical," Emma replied. "He's lost a dangerous amount of blood. If infection sets in before morning, we'll have another fight on our hands." Reed looked through the glass toward Nathan before speaking again. "You've probably figured out he isn't an ordinary patient. I figured that out the moment an FBI agent shut down half my hospital." For the first time all night, something close to a smile appeared on Reed's face. He lowered his voice. "Nathan Cross wasn't supposed to survive today." Emma remained silent. "He spent 18 months undercover helping expose one of the largest illegal weapons trafficking networks operating across the western United States. 3 federal agencies built this investigation around one witness. Nathan." Reed nodded once. "He's the only living person who knows the identities of the buyers, the transport routes, and the financial network behind the operation." Emma looked back toward Nathan. "So whoever shot him was trying to erase the case." Reed finished the sentence for her. "We had a secure transport plan from a military facility outside Denver. Only 9 people knew the exact route. And yet someone was waiting." "Exactly." Emma folded her arms. "So there's a leak?" "There is." Reed's eyes hardened. "And until we know who it is, everyone becomes a possibility." The words lingered longer than either of them liked. Inside Bay 4, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. Not toward Emma, toward the hallway. His ears stood perfectly upright. Emma instinctively followed his gaze. A janitor was pushing a gray cleaning cart slowly past the nurse's station. Nothing unusual at first glance. The man appeared to be around 30 years old, lean and slightly taller than average. His dark hair was hidden beneath a maintenance cap, and a short beard partially concealed a narrow face. His employee badge identified him as Kyle Mercer, recently assigned to overnight sanitation. He walked with steady, unhurried movements and never looked directly toward Bay 4. But Ranger watched him. Every step. The dog's muscles tensed almost imperceptibly, not enough to growl, not enough to stand. Just enough for Emma to notice. Kyle disappeared around the corner. Only then did Ranger slowly relax. Emma frowned. Dogs noticed things people ignored. She made a quiet mental note but said nothing. Across the hall, Sarah Mitchell was finishing medication inventory when a blinking icon appeared on one of the hospital's maintenance monitors. Sarah had always been unusually observant. As a child, she loved solving puzzles, and even as a nurse she found herself noticing patterns others dismissed. Curiosity had occasionally gotten her into trouble, but it had also prevented more than one medical error. She glanced at the screen. Basement security camera B12, signal lost, restored, duration 4 minutes. Sarah frowned. 5 minutes later it happened again. Different camera, same hallway, another brief interruption. She clicked through archived logs. The same basement cameras had lost signal almost every night for the past week. Always between midnight and 3 in the morning. Always for only a few minutes. "That's strange," she whispered. One of the IT technicians walking by noticed her studying the monitor. "Those old cameras?" he shrugged. "Probably wiring." "Every night?" He smiled carelessly. "Old buildings do weird things." Sarah wasn't convinced. She copied the maintenance log number onto a sticky note and slipped it into her pocket. It might be nothing. Or it might be something nobody else had bothered to notice. Back inside Bay 4, Emma finished adjusting Nathan's IV pump. Ranger remained quiet beside the bed. Yet every few minutes his eyes drifted toward the hallway where the new janitor had disappeared. Emma glanced that direction again. The corridor looked perfectly ordinary. Doctors hurried between rooms, phones rang, monitors beeped, everything appeared normal. But after years in trauma medicine, Emma had learned one difficult lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous moments looked exactly like ordinary ones. Nathan Cross regained consciousness at 1:26 in the morning, without making a sound. Emma noticed because the rhythm on the heart monitor changed before his eyes opened. His pulse rose by 8 beats, his breathing became shallower, and the fingers of his uninjured hand tightened against the sheet. When Emma looked toward the bed, Nathan was already studying the room. His gray-blue eyes moved from the IV tubing to the cardiac monitor, then to the locked trauma bay doors and the 2 federal agents stationed outside. He did not look confused. He looked like a soldier waking behind enemy lines and calculating how much danger remained. Ranger rose instantly from the floor. The Belgian Malinois placed his front paws against the mattress and pressed his nose beneath Nathan's hand. For the first time since arriving at Cedar Ridge Regional Hospital, the tension left the dog's face. Nathan's fingers rested weakly between Ranger's ears, and the canine released a quiet breath that sounded almost human. "You're at Cedar Ridge Regional," Emma said. "You've lost a significant amount of blood, but you're stable for now." Nathan's eyes settled on her. Up close, the exhaustion in his face was more visible. Dark bruising covered one cheekbone, and the thin scar along his jaw disappeared beneath several days of beard growth. Even weakened, he carried a controlled intensity. He appeared to be a man who had spent years keeping emotion behind locked doors because hesitation had once cost someone dearly. "Name?" he asked, his voice rough. "Emma Brooks, trauma nurse." His gaze shifted toward Ranger, who remained calm beside her. Nathan seemed to understand immediately that something unusual had happened. Dr. Kevin Harper entered carrying a prepared syringe. "Mr. Cross, this will help with the pain and allow you to rest. Nathan looked at the medication label and shook his head. You have multiple gunshot injuries, Harper said impatiently. Your body needs rest. No strong sedatives, Nathan answered. That isn't a reasonable request. Nathan turned toward Emma instead of the doctor. Need to stay awake. Emma checked his blood pressure. It was still low, but no longer falling. She understood his concern. A heavily sedated patient would be unable to identify a threat, answer questions, or control Ranger if something went wrong. Still, untreated pain could increase his heart rate and slow recovery. I can give you a lower dose, she said. Enough to reduce the pain without putting you under. Nathan studied her for several seconds, then nodded once. Harper looked offended but handed Emma the syringe. She adjusted the dosage herself and administered it slowly. Ranger watched her hands, but his body remained relaxed. Nathan noticed that too. Before he could ask another question, Ranger's head snapped toward the hallway. The change was immediate. His ears rose, his shoulders hardened, and a deep growl formed in his chest. Then he barked once toward the supply room across from Bay 4. The sound cut through the trauma wing. Special Agent Mason Reed entered with one hand beneath his jacket. What is it? Ranger barked again, louder this time, staring at the closed supply room door. Emma followed his gaze. The room stored bandages, portable equipment, medications, and sealed blood coolers used during emergencies. It should have been locked after midnight, yet the door stood open by less than an inch. Reed signaled to another agent, who approached from the opposite side. They entered together with weapons drawn. The room was empty. Shelves of sealed supplies lined the walls. A narrow window near the ceiling remained closed, and the rear service door was still locked from the inside. Nothing, the second agent reported. Emma stepped closer after Reed cleared the room. Near the lock, she noticed a fresh silver mark in the painted metal, as though a thin tool had recently been forced between the door and frame. There was also a damp shoe print beside the lowest shelf. It was too narrow to belong to either agent and too fresh to have been left during the previous shift. Someone was here, Emma said. Reed crouched beside the mark. Could be maintenance. At 1:30 in the morning? He did not answer. Agents searched the adjoining rooms, questioned staff members, and checked both ends of the corridor. No unauthorized person was found. Kyle Mercer, the new janitor Ranger had watched earlier, claimed he had been cleaning the west stairwell for the past 40 minutes. His badge access record appeared to support the statement. When Emma returned to Nathan's bedside, he was watching Ranger. They found nothing, she told him. Nathan's expression did not change. Dog found something. We saw evidence that someone entered the room, but there's no proof who it was. Ranger doesn't alert without reason. Emma glanced toward the corridor. He could have heard someone moving supplies. No. Nathan's voice was weak but certain. 4 years together. He knows hospital sounds, engines, gunfire, crowds. He alerts to intent. Emma remained silent. Nathan turned his eyes toward her. If he warns you, trust him. Don't wait for people to confirm it. The words carried more than professional confidence. They sounded like a lesson learned through loss. Across the hospital, Sarah Mitchell sat alone at a computer near the medication station. The maintenance logs she had copied earlier still troubled her. She discovered that the camera system automatically deleted temporary diagnostic files every morning at 5. If she waited, the pattern of signal failures might disappear permanently. Sarah inserted a small, encrypted hospital drive used for training records. Her hands trembled slightly as she copied the basement camera logs, outage reports, and access timestamps. She knew she was bending procedure, but years earlier, Sarah had ignored a medication discrepancy because a senior nurse told her it was probably harmless. The error had nearly killed an elderly patient. Since then, she had promised herself never to dismiss a pattern simply because someone more confident said it meant nothing. The files finished copying at 2:41 a.m. Sarah hid the drive inside the zipped pocket of her scrub jacket. She had no idea that the footage contained a detail the intruder had failed to erase. Back in Bay 4, Emma prepared Nathan's next transfusion. She opened the secured cooler and stopped. One of the 3 blood bags issued specifically for Nathan was gone. She checked the chart. No one had administered it. No nurse had signed it out. The cooler seal had been replaced carefully enough to appear untouched. Emma looked toward Ranger. The canine was already standing, and this time he was not watching the supply room. He was watching the dark corridor beyond it. The missing blood bag transformed a vague security concern into proof that someone inside Cedar Ridge Regional Hospital was moving deliberately against Nathan Cross. By 3:05 a.m., Special Agent Mason Reed had ordered the blood storage room sealed, but he kept the investigation quiet. No general alarm was announced and no additional officers appeared in the corridor. Reed believed an obvious response would only warn the intruder that the missing bag had been discovered. Emma Brooks understood the strategy, though she hated continuing her duties while pretending that nothing was wrong. Inside Bay 4, Nathan remained weak but conscious, and Ranger stood beside the bed with his attention fixed on every movement outside the room. The Belgian Malinois no longer rested for more than a few seconds at a time. His ears turned toward distant footsteps, elevator chimes, and the soft squeak of supply cart wheels sorting ordinary hospital noise from something only he seemed capable of recognizing. Sarah Mitchell found Emma near the medication station 20 minutes later. The younger nurse's face had lost its usual warmth. Her curly blonde hair had slipped from beneath her surgical cap, and she kept one hand pressed against the pocket containing the encrypted drive. "I need to show you something," she whispered. Emma followed her into a small staff consultation room and locked the door behind them. Sarah inserted the drive into a computer that was not connected to the hospital network. She had copied 7 nights of camera outage records, basement access logs, and employee schedules before the system erased them. Emma began comparing the timestamps while Sarah opened the overnight staffing lists. At first, the failures appeared random. Camera B12 went dark for 4 minutes on Monday. B09 failed for 6 minutes on Wednesday. The loading dock feed disappeared twice on Friday. Yet one employee's badge appeared in the same area within 10 minutes of every interruption. His name was Aaron Pike. Aaron was a 38-year-old hospital maintenance technician who had joined Cedar Ridge 6 months earlier. His identification photograph showed a lean man with pale skin, close-cropped brown hair, and a narrow mouth that seemed permanently set in disapproval. He was slightly under 6 feet tall and wore clear safety glasses even when he was not working with machinery. According to his personnel file, Aaron was quiet, punctual, and skilled with electrical systems. Co-workers described him as helpful but distant. He rarely joined conversations, never attended staff gatherings, and volunteered for overnight repairs that allowed him to move through restricted areas without attracting attention. A previous workplace report mentioned that he had served as a civilian communications contractor overseas, but it gave no details about where or for whom. "He was scheduled during every outage," Sarah said, "not always in the basement, but always somewhere that gave him a reason to be near the cameras." Emma examined the access records. Aaron's badge had opened the service elevator shortly before the supply room door was disturbed. It had also entered the blood storage corridor 17 minutes before Nathan's transfusion bag disappeared. Did anyone else access those areas? "Several people," Sarah replied, "but he's the only one connected to all of them." A vibration came from Sarah's pocket. She removed her phone and froze. The message had been sent from an unknown number. "Delete the camera files. You have until 3:30. Do not make this worse." For a moment, Sarah looked exactly as frightened as the sender intended. Her fingers tightened around the phone, and the color drained from her face. Emma expected her to ask for security or insist that they destroy the drive. Instead, Sarah inhaled slowly and placed both the phone and the encrypted drive into Emma's hands. "When I was a new nurse, I saw a dosage error and let someone convince me I was imagining it," Sarah said. "A patient almost died because I was afraid of being wrong. I promised myself I would never stay quiet like that again." "You're not staying quiet," Emma assured her. "No, Sarah lifted her chin, fear still visible but no longer controlling her. "We give everything to Reed, and until this is over, you don't go anywhere alone." The words changed something between them. They had always been friends, but friendship was built through ordinary days. This was different. Sarah was choosing to stand beside Emma while knowing that someone inside the hospital was watching them. They were no longer simply co-workers sharing a night shift. They had become partners. Reed reviewed the files without changing expression. He immediately ordered 2 plainclothes agents to begin covert surveillance of Aaron Pike. One was assigned to the maintenance corridor, while another watched the employee entrances. Aaron was not to be questioned, detained, or allowed to know he had become a suspect. Reed also arranged for Sarah's phone to be traced, though the threatening message had been routed through an encrypted service and could not immediately be connected to a physical device. At 3:24 a.m., Aaron appeared at the eastern end of the trauma corridor carrying a metal toolbox. He wore dark gray maintenance coveralls and walked with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed his presence required no explanation. His badge swung from his chest, and his safety glasses reflected the overhead lights. He stopped near an electrical panel across from Bay 4 and knelt as though beginning a routine inspection. Ranger saw him. The dog did not bark this time. He rose slowly and moved between Nathan's bed and the doorway. His head lowered, his tail became rigid, and a deep vibration formed inside his chest. Aaron glanced toward the room for less than a second before returning his attention to the panel. Nathan followed Ranger's gaze. His face changed. Emma saw recognition arrive gradually, first as confusion, then certainty. Nathan forced himself higher against the pillows despite the pain in his chest. "That man," he said quietly. "You know him?" Emma asked. "Not his name." Nathan continued staring through the narrow glass panel. 6 months ago, outside the Denver staging base, he was working on a communications cabinet near the West Gate. I saw him twice after that near restricted transport vehicles. Was he authorized? I assumed he was. The admission appeared to trouble Nathan more than the pain. A man trained to notice threats had seen Aaron Pike before, but had accepted the disguise because it belonged in the environment. Emma informed Reed through the secure phone. The agent did not approach Aaron. Instead, he instructed everyone to continue behaving normally while the surveillance team recorded the technician's movements. Aaron finished his supposed repair, closed the panel, and walked toward the service elevator. Ranger remained standing until the elevator doors closed behind him. Sarah joined Emma outside Bay 4. She looked through the glass at Nathan and Ranger, then toward the empty corridor where Aaron had disappeared. "He knows we found something," Sarah whispered. Emma tightened her grip around the encrypted drive. "Then we make sure he never learns how much." Inside the room, Nathan rested his hand against Ranger's neck. The dog's eyes remained fixed on the elevator doors, waiting for the man he remembered to return. Aaron Pike made his move at 3:47 a.m., 23 minutes after leaving the trauma corridor. The rain outside Cedar Ridge Regional Hospital had intensified into a violent mountain storm, drumming against the windows while wind shook the emergency entrance doors in their frames. Inside Bay 4, Emma Brooks was replacing Nathan Cross's chest dressing when Ranger suddenly lifted his head. The Belgian Malinois had been resting beside the bed, but the change in him was immediate. His ears turned toward the nurse's station, his amber eyes sharpened, and a low growl formed deep in his chest. Nathan felt it through the hand resting against the dog's neck. "Someone's moving," he said. Emma looked toward the door. The corridor appeared empty, but Nathan's medical chart was no longer in the locked holder outside the room. Ranger surged to his feet and moved into the hallway. Emma followed, finding the door to the medical records office partially open. A shadow shifted beyond the frosted glass. Special Agent Mason Reed emerged from the opposite corridor and raised one hand, ordering her to remain behind him. Before he reached the door, Aaron Pike burst through it with Nathan's paper chart tucked beneath his jacket and a tablet containing encrypted treatment records clutched against his chest. His usually controlled appearance had changed. His safety glasses were gone, rain-dark hair clung to his forehead, and desperation had replaced the cold patience in his narrow face. He shoved a records clerk aside and sprinted toward the service stairwell. "Federal agent, stop!" Reed shouted. Aaron did not slow down. Ranger barked once and launched forward, but Emma caught the handle on his harness before he reached the stairwell. Nathan was still inside the trauma bay, injured and unable to follow. Ranger twisted toward her, torn between protecting his handler and pursuing the threat. Emma understood what he was asking. She looked back through the open doorway. Nathan had forced himself upright, his face tight with pain. "Go!" Nathan ordered. Emma released the harness. Ranger disappeared down the stairwell with Reed and two plainclothes agents close behind. Emma should have remained with Nathan, but the stolen tablet contained every detail of his injuries, medications, blood type, and transfer plans. If Aaron escaped with it, whoever controlled him would know exactly how vulnerable Nathan remained. Emma grabbed her rain jacket from the nurse's station and followed. The stairwell echoed with pounding boots and Ranger's claws striking concrete. Aaron reached the ground floor, crossed the ambulance bay, and crashed through an emergency exit. Wind tore the door from his hand. Rain swept sideways beneath the security lights, turning the staff parking structure into a maze of reflected headlights and flooded pavement. Reed's agents divided at the entrance. One moved toward the eastern ramp, while Reed followed Ranger between two rows of parked vehicles. Emma stayed several steps behind, struggling to see through the rain. Ahead, Aaron threw Nathan's paper chart into a drainage channel, but kept the tablet beneath his jacket. He glanced toward the upper level of the garage, where a black sport utility vehicle waited with its engine running. Behind the wheel sat Trevor Vale, a 42-year-old former private security contractor with a heavy build, shaved head, and a thick, gray-streaked beard. Trevor had once worked convoy protection overseas, but after being dismissed for selling restricted equipment, he had developed a bitter contempt for institutions and a loyalty only to whoever paid him most. He watched Aaron approaching with impatient, calculating eyes, one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding a phone. "Aaron," Reed called, "there is nowhere to go." Aaron reached the next row of cars and turned sharply. He pulled a compact pistol from beneath his coveralls, but Ranger appeared between two vehicles before he could aim. The Malinois charged with such speed that Aaron fired blindly into the concrete ceiling. The shot echoed through the garage. Ranger struck him high in the chest, knocking him backward onto the wet pavement. The tablet slid several feet away. Aaron tried to raise the weapon again. Ranger seized his forearm through the fabric of his sleeve and pinned him without tearing deeper than necessary. Aaron screamed and dropped the pistol. Reed kicked it beyond reach while another agent secured his hands. Emma ran toward the tablet. That was when Trevor accelerated. The SUV's headlights swung directly toward her. Tires spun through standing water as the vehicle surged down the lane. Emma froze for one fatal second, blinded by the beams and unable to judge which direction offered safety. "Emma!" Nathan's voice cut through the storm. He had followed them, still wearing his hospital gown beneath a hastily pulled-on tactical jacket. Nathan stood near the emergency exit with his IV tubing torn free and blood beginning to spread through the dressing at his shoulder. His face was pale, but his eyes were completely focused. He crossed the distance faster than any injured man should have been able to move. Reaching Emma seconds before impact, he wrapped his good arm around her waist and drove both of them behind a concrete support pillar. The SUV struck the corner of the barrier with a violent metallic crash. Nathan's body absorbed most of Emma's fall. Pain tore through his chest, but he kept himself between her and the vehicle until the broken glass stopped falling. Trevor reversed and attempted to escape toward the lower exit. One federal vehicle blocked the ramp while another closed behind him. Realizing he was trapped, Trevor abandoned the SUV and ran, but he managed only a few steps before two agents forced him to the ground. Emma pushed herself upright and turned toward Nathan. "What were you thinking?" His breathing was ragged. Blood had reached the edge of his bandage, and one knee remained pressed against the pavement as he fought to stay conscious. "You were in the lane," he answered. "You could have reopened every wound I just stabilized." Nathan looked at her as though the answer were obvious. You were in the lane. For the first time, Emma saw something in his expression that had nothing to do with duty, tactical necessity, or gratitude toward a nurse. He had not left his bed to protect evidence. He had not risked his life because the investigation required it. He had come because she was in danger. Ranger released Aaron only when Reed gave the command. The dog immediately crossed the flooded pavement and pressed himself against Nathan's side, supporting him as Emma examined the damaged dressing. Reed recovered Aaron's phone from an inner pocket protected by a waterproof case. The device was still unlocked. On its screen was an encrypted contact directory containing names, payment records, transportation codes, and photographs connected to dozens of people across several states. Reed's expression hardened as he scrolled through it. "This isn't one insider," he said. "It's the entire network." Emma helped Nathan to his feet, while Ranger remained against his leg. Around them, federal agents secured Aaron, Trevor, the stolen tablet, and the phone that could bring down everyone who had tried to silence Nathan. Nathan leaned heavily on Emma as they moved back toward the hospital. She could feel the weakness in him, but she could also feel how carefully he adjusted his weight to keep from hurting her. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Something between them had changed in the rain, and both of them knew it. The phone recovered from Aaron Pike contained more than a list of names. Hidden behind a false banking application was a live shipment schedule, coded photographs of military-grade weapons, and coordinates leading to an abandoned agricultural warehouse 16 miles north of Cedar Ridge. By sunrise, Special Agent Mason Reed had confirmed that the location belonged to a shell company connected to 3 suspects already under federal investigation. The final message on the device had been sent less than an hour before Aaron's capture. "Move everything before 0600. Burn what remains." Reed understood immediately that the network knew something had gone wrong. If the FBI waited for daylight, the warehouse would be empty or burning. Nathan Cross was back in Bay 4 when Reed brought him the decoded map. Emma had repaired the damage to his shoulder dressing, restarted his IV, and warned him that another reckless movement could cause permanent internal injury. Nathan appeared paler than before, but his gray-blue eyes remained focused. Ranger rested beside the bed with rain still darkening his sable coat, though the dog's attention shifted toward Reed as soon as the coordinates were placed on the table. "I know that property," Nathan said. "The main warehouse is a decoy. There's a loading tunnel beneath the western grain silo." Reed studied him. "How do you know?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "My team followed a shipment there 8 months ago." Emma noticed his hand close around the edge of the blanket. Until then, Nathan had spoken about the operation as though it were merely a mission. Now the distance disappeared. His team had included Sergeant Luke Brennan, a broad, red-haired communications specialist known for making jokes during the worst moments, and Staff Sergeant Marcus Hale, a quiet, powerfully built father of 2 who had served beside Nathan for nearly 9 years. Both men had died when false intelligence led them into an ambush outside Denver. Nathan had survived because Luke pushed him behind an armored vehicle seconds before the explosion. "We promised we would finish it," Nathan said quietly. "Luke, Marcus, and me." Reed folded the map. "Then help us finish it. But you are not entering that warehouse." Nathan looked ready to argue, but Emma stepped between them. "For once, Agent Reed and I agree." An hour later, Nathan was moved into an armored FBI command vehicle parked half a mile from the warehouse. Emma accompanied him because Reed refused to risk transporting Nathan without the only medical professional Ranger consistently trusted. The arrangement did not make her happy, but it kept Nathan under supervision. Ranger, however, would join the tactical entry team. Leading that team was Supervisory Special Agent Elena Torres, a 40-year-old woman with a compact athletic build, black hair braided tightly behind her head, and calm brown eyes that seemed to measure every exit in a room. Torres had spent 12 years in federal tactical operations after losing a younger brother to an illegal weapons dealer. The loss had made her patient rather than reckless. She believed successful raids were built on discipline, not anger. She crouched beside Ranger outside the vehicle. "He takes commands from Cross?" And from Emma when he chooses, Reed said. Nathan leaned toward the open door. Ranger, search! The Malinois looked at him for one long second, then turned and followed Torres into the darkness. Through drone cameras and body-mounted video, Nathan watched the team approach the warehouse beneath the fading storm clouds. The property looked abandoned from the road. Rusted grain silos, collapsed fencing, and a sagging metal roof. But thermal imaging showed 14 people moving underground. 2 trucks were positioned behind the western silo, their engines already warm. Nathan directed Torres toward a drainage channel concealed beneath weeds. Ranger found the tunnel entrance before the agents reached it. He stopped beside a section of corrugated metal and gave a silent, trained indication. Behind it, the team discovered a reinforced door leading below ground. Inside the command vehicle, Nathan's breathing became shallow. Emma checked his pulse and saw the tension spreading through his body. "You're not back there," she said softly. "I should have seen the ambush. You survived it. They didn't." Emma held his gaze. "Then make surviving mean something." The words steadied him. Torres's team breached the underground loading tunnel at 5:42 a.m. Armed guards fired from behind stacked shipping crates, but the FBI advanced using shields and smoke. Ranger moved with the front team, locating one gunman hidden beneath a transport truck and another preparing to escape through a rear maintenance shaft. He did not attack without command. He tracked, indicated, and allowed the agents to make the arrests. At the center of the warehouse stood Calvin Rourke, the man Nathan had spent 18 months trying to expose. Rourke was 51, tall and lean, with silver hair combed neatly back and a refined face that belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than an underground weapons depot. He spoke politely even when issuing threats, a habit that made him more dangerous because cruelty never disturbed his composure. He had built the trafficking network by bribing contractors, hospital workers, transport officers, and former soldiers who knew where security systems were weakest. Rourke attempted to destroy a laptop containing transaction records, but Ranger lunged at the table and knocked the device from his reach before he could ignite it. Torres forced Rourke to the ground and placed him under arrest. Across the warehouse, agents recovered rifles, explosives, stolen military communication systems, payment ledgers, and enough evidence to connect every name stored on Aaron's phone. At 6:13 a.m., Reed received the confirmation. "The network is down," he told Nathan. "Rourke is alive. The records are intact." Nathan closed his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he reached down as Ranger returned to the command vehicle, wet, exhausted, and still alert. The dog placed his head beneath Nathan's hand. "That was the last one," Nathan whispered. "We kept the promise." Later that morning, Sarah Mitchell was called into a private hospital conference room. She expected questions about violating data procedures. Instead, Reed presented her with a written federal commendation for preserving evidence that linked Aaron Pike to the camera failures and proved the hospital breach had been planned. Sarah stared at the document. "I only copied some files." "You protected evidence while someone was threatening you," Reed replied. "That is not only anything." For years, Sarah had thought of herself as the cheerful nurse who assisted more confident people. But as Emma stood beside her, she finally understood that courage did not always look dramatic. Sometimes it was simply refusing to delete the truth. Back in Bay 4, Ranger slept with his head resting against Nathan's bed. The warehouse was secured, the weapons network was collapsing, and the men Nathan had lost would finally have justice. For the first time since the ambush, Nathan allowed himself to rest. Nathan Cross left Cedar Ridge Regional Hospital 26 days after the raid on the warehouse. By then, the swelling around his shoulder had faded, the drain had been removed, and the deepest wound beneath his collarbone had finally begun to close. He still moved carefully, favoring his left side whenever he stood, but the strength had returned to his face. The bruises were gone, revealing the hard angles of his jaw and the thin scar that curved beneath it. He wore dark jeans, a gray shirt, and a weathered field jacket instead of the hospital gown Emma had first seen him in. Ranger walked beside him without a working harness for the first time in almost 9 years. The Belgian Malinois wore only a plain leather collar, yet his posture remained disciplined, his amber eyes checking doors, hands, and unfamiliar movements out of habit. Emma met them near the discharge desk. She had completed Nathan's final assessment herself, checking his blood pressure twice and reviewing every restriction in a tone that allowed no argument. "No lifting anything heavier than 15 pounds, she said. "No running, no tactical training, and no pretending pain is an inconvenience you can ignore." Nathan signed the release forms with his right hand. "How long?" "6 weeks. That seems excessive." "That is because you measure recovery in whether you can still stand." A faint smile touched his face. "Standing worked. It nearly put you back in surgery." Beside them, Sarah Mitchell tried unsuccessfully to hide her amusement. Since receiving the federal commendation, Sarah carried herself differently. Her warm personality had not changed, but the uncertainty that once followed her decisions was gone. She no longer apologized before offering an opinion. The recognition had not transformed her into someone new. It had reminded her of the capable person she had always been. "Listen to your nurse," Sarah told Nathan. "She has defeated armed men, corrupt technicians, federal bureaucracy, and your terrible judgment." "I noticed," Nathan replied. Emma shook her head, but she was smiling when she handed him the discharge papers. Nathan and Ranger did not leave immediately. Outside the hospital, several unmarked federal vehicles waited to escort them to a military airfield on the eastern side of Cedar Ridge. Ranger's official retirement ceremony would take place there that afternoon. Because his medical evaluation had confirmed advancing damage in his right hip, the Department of Defense had approved his release from service. Nathan had already completed the adoption documents. After years of deployments, temporary kennels, military transports, and sleeping wherever Nathan slept, Ranger was finally going home with the only handler he had ever accepted completely. Emma had not planned to attend the ceremony. She told herself that Nathan was no longer her patient, and that Ranger's retirement belonged to soldiers, agents, and handlers who understood what 9 years of service meant. Yet shortly before noon, Sarah appeared in the locker room holding Emma's dark green coat. "You're coming," Sarah said. "I have charting. You finished it 20 minutes ago. I have laundry. You have avoided your apartment's laundry room for 11 days. Emma glanced at her. Sarah placed the coat in her arms. "Some moments do not come back just because you were too afraid to attend them the first time." That sentence followed Emma all the way to the airfield. The ceremony took place inside a converted aircraft hangar overlooking the rain-washed Colorado foothills. Folding chairs faced a small platform decorated with the American flag and the insignia of Ranger's former unit. Soldiers, federal agents, hospital staff, and several families of fallen service members filled the room. No one treated Ranger like an ordinary dog. Men who rarely displayed emotion knelt to touch his shoulder, while widows held his face between their hands and thanked him for returning when others had not. The ceremony was led by Colonel David Mercer, a 60-year-old Army officer with a tall, spare frame, silver hair, and a voice softened by decades of giving difficult news to military families. A helicopter accident early in his career had left him with a slight limp and a permanent respect for the working animals that had helped locate his missing crew. He spoke without theatrical emotion, describing Ranger's 23 completed missions, 7 protected evacuations, and the lives saved through his detection work. "Service is not measured only by obedience," Colonel Mercer said. "It is measured by the lives a soldier brings home. Ranger brought many home." Nathan stood beside the platform, one hand resting on Ranger's back. His expression remained controlled until Mercer mentioned Luke Brennan and Marcus Hale. Then his fingers tightened slightly in Ranger's fur. The dog leaned against Nathan's leg, responding to a grief that required no spoken command. When the retirement certificate was presented, Nathan removed Ranger's faded military harness. The leather and fabric were scratched, discolored, and worn smooth at the edges from years of use. For several seconds, Ranger remained still, as though waiting for it to be fastened again. Nathan crouched, despite the pain in his shoulder, and placed both hands on the dog's neck. "No more deployments," he whispered. "No more transport cages. You're coming home." Applause filled the hangar. Ranger looked at Nathan, then turned his head toward the audience. Emma stood near the back beside Sarah. She had chosen a place where she would not be noticed, but Ranger found her immediately. His ears lifted. Without waiting for Nathan's command, he stepped away from the platform and walked between the rows of chairs. The room gradually became quiet. Ranger stopped directly in front of Emma. Then he sat beside her left leg. Not in front of her as a guard, not facing her as though waiting for instruction. Beside her, shoulder pressed gently against her knee, as if that was where he had already decided he belonged. Emma lowered one hand to the top of his head. Ranger closed his eyes briefly beneath her touch. Nathan watched them from the platform. This time he did not hide his smile. "In his entire career," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hangar, "Ranger only truly chose two people." He stepped down from the platform and approached them. "One was me." Nathan stopped in front of Emma. His gray-blue eyes held hers with the same directness he had shown in the hospital. But now there was no emergency between them, and no professional duty to explain why he had come closer. "The other was you." Emma looked down at Ranger, unable to trust her voice. For years, she had believed leaving Cedar Ridge would finally separate her from everything she had lost. The unsigned resignation letter was still inside her locker, waiting for a decision she had delayed because some part of her had never truly wanted to go. She understood now that Cedar Ridge was no longer only the town where Jason had died. It was also where Sarah had stood beside her when fear would have been easier. It was where a wounded soldier had risked his life to pull her from the path of a car. It was where a dog, who trusted almost no one, had quietly chosen to sit beside her. The following morning, Emma entered the trauma wing before her shift and opened her locker. She removed the resignation letter, read it once, and tore it in half. Sarah watched from the doorway. "Seattle?" Emma dropped the pieces into the trash. "Not anymore." Sarah smiled. "What changed?" Emma glanced through the window toward the parking lot, where Nathan was waiting beside his truck, while Ranger sat in the passenger seat, watching the hospital entrance. "I finally remembered that staying isn't always the same as being trapped," Emma said. "Sometimes it means you found something worth staying for." She closed the locker and walked toward them. 6 months after Emma Brooks tore up her resignation letter, the first sunlight of spring fell across 40 acres of meadowland outside Cedar Ridge. At the end of a newly repaired gravel road stood a renovated ranch house, 2 training barns, a small medical building, and a wooden sign carved with the words, "Every hero deserves a home." Nathan Cross had purchased the abandoned property with compensation from his final operation and donations from military families who believed in his vision. He called it Second Watch Center, a place where retired working dogs could learn how to live without commands and veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress could rediscover a purpose beyond survival. Nathan still carried stiffness in his left shoulder, and the scar beneath his collarbone remained visible whenever he worked in a t-shirt. Yet he moved with greater ease now. His dark hair had grown slightly longer, his face no longer carried the exhaustion Emma had first seen in the hospital, and the guarded intensity in his gray-blue eyes had softened into quiet patience. He trained each veteran the same way he had once worked with Ranger, without pity, without pressure, and without pretending recovery happened quickly. Emma divided her time between Cedar Ridge Regional Hospital and the center, serving as its medical director. She established emergency protocols, monitored the health of veterans and dogs, and built partnerships with local therapists and physicians. She remained calm and exacting, but the emotional distance she had once used as armor had begun to disappear. She laughed more easily, allowed people to help her, and no longer measured every relationship by the possibility of losing it. Sarah Mitchell became director of the center's volunteer program. With her curly blonde hair usually tied beneath a baseball cap and her warm hazel eyes always searching for someone who needed encouragement, Sarah coordinated community meals, transportation, fundraising events, and visiting families. She had stopped describing herself as just a nurse. The federal commendation hung in her small office not because she enjoyed recognition, but because it reminded her that courage could begin with refusing to ignore one small detail. Ranger became the center's unofficial greeter. His damaged hip prevented long training exercises, but every morning he positioned himself beside the main porch and waited for arriving veterans. Some stepped from their cars angry. Others were silent, ashamed that crowded rooms, fireworks, or sudden noises could still pull them back into memories they wanted to escape. Ranger never demanded affection. He simply approached, sat within reach, and waited. More often than not, the veterans touched his head before speaking to another person. Nathan sometimes watched from the barn and understood that Ranger was still performing a mission. Only now his duty was not to detect weapons or protect a transport route. It was to show wounded people that trust could return quietly. One evening in early autumn, Nathan asked Emma to walk with him beyond the training field. Ranger followed them toward an old oak tree at the top of a gentle hill. It was the place where Nathan had first removed Ranger's leash after retirement. On that day, the dog had stood motionless for several seconds, uncertain what freedom required, before racing through the grass like a puppy. Now Ranger settled beneath the branches, while the sunset turned the mountains gold. Nathan reached into his jacket and lowered himself carefully onto one knee. The movement made Emma's eyes widen. "Your shoulder," she began. "For once," he said, smiling, "I'm willing to ignore medical advice." He opened a small box containing a simple ring with a pale green stone that matched her eyes. Nathan told her he had spent years believing his life ended with every person he failed to bring home. Emma had taught him that surviving was not betrayal and that building something new could honor the dead better than remaining trapped beside them. "Ranger chose you before I understood why," he said. "I'm just grateful he gave me enough time to catch up." Emma laughed through tears and said yes before he could finish asking. Ranger lifted his head at the sound of her voice, walked over and pressed himself between them until they were both holding him. They married 1 year later beneath the same oak tree. Sarah stood beside Emma, crying openly, despite insisting all morning that she would remain composed. Nathan wore a dark suit that could not fully disguise the posture of a soldier, while Emma chose a simple ivory dress and carried no flowers except a small metal tag from Ranger's retired harness tied around her wrist. Ranger walked between them during the ceremony, moving slowly but proudly. No grand promises were made about perfect lives. Nathan and Emma promised something more believable, that neither of them would face the difficult days alone. By the center's second anniversary, Second Watch had expanded to include 12 retired service dogs, residential cabins for veterans, and a weekend support program for military families. The anniversary celebration became a community festival. Former patients returned with spouses and children. Veterans Ranger had once greeted in silence came back laughing, volunteering, and guiding newer arrivals through the same uncertainty they had survived. Near the porch stood 8-year-old Eli Turner, a slender autistic boy with straight brown hair, large dark eyes, and a habit of pressing both hands against his ears when surrounded by unfamiliar sounds. Eli rarely spoke outside his home and had not smiled in public for almost a year. His mother, Rebecca, a tired but gentle woman in her mid-30s, remained several steps behind him, allowing him to approach in his own time. Ranger lay beneath the porch railing, his muzzle now silver and his movements slower. Eli sat several feet away. Neither moved for nearly a minute. Then Ranger placed his head on the grass between his paws. Eli crawled closer and wrapped both arms gently around the old dog's neck. Ranger closed his eyes. A small smile appeared on Eli's face. Rebecca covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes, while the crowd instinctively grew quiet around them. Emma watched from Nathan's side. "Sometimes the greatest thing we save isn't a life," she whispered. Nathan followed her gaze toward the child and the aging dog. "It's hope," she finished. Years passed gently after that. Ranger's legs weakened, but his mornings still began on the porch between Nathan and Emma. He never returned to a kennel. He never spent another night wondering where his handler had gone. He aged beside the people he had chosen, surrounded by veterans whose lives had changed because he greeted them at the door. And on bright afternoons, Nathan, Emma, and Ranger still walked slowly along the sunlit road before the center, beneath the wooden sign that expressed everything they had learned together. Every hero deserves a home. Maybe Ranger did not enter Emma's life by accident. Maybe God placed a wounded soldier, a loyal dog, and a woman who had nearly given up on her future in the same hospital that stormy night for a reason. Nathan believed his purpose had ended with the teammates he could not save. Emma believed her heart had closed forever after losing the man she loved. Ranger had spent nearly 9 years protecting others without ever knowing whether he would have a home of his own. Yet God took 3 wounded souls and used them to heal one another. Sometimes the miracle is not that the storm disappears. It is that God sends someone to stand beside us until we are strong enough to walk through it. Do you believe Ranger trusted Emma because of his training, or because he sensed that God had chosen her to become part of their family? And if you had been in Emma's position that night, would you have stepped toward the dog or stayed safely outside the room? Share your answer in the comments. Your story or opinion may give hope to someone who needs it today. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next powerful stories about loyalty, courage, faith, and second chances.